thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a joy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been a huge fan of yours for a long time. I love Career Suicide. I love your acting work.
Thanks.
You're so funny, and I especially love your podcast. I think it's really great. I think the premise of it is so unique, and also I love how present you feel with each guest, even though it's obviously it's going out to a bunch of people. You really seem like your main focus is that person on the other end of that call, and that feels really special.
Thanks. Yeah, it took me a while to figure out, but I'm like, my main job is to just get them comfortable and then get out of the way. So that's sort of the impulse. Is just like, how can I make you understand that you're in good hands? And now can I pipe down enough that you just feel like you're being listened to and respected? And then we just go. It's like a pretty simple podcast, but I'm proud of it.
Yeah, that seems like your natural instinct, or was that something that you learned? Was it something that took you time to kind of find that groove?
It took me time because when I started the show, like I always had kind of an emo fan base, like people willing to open up. I was really proud of that, but a lot of it was through my old TV show, which was pretty insane and absurd and intentionally very weird. And a lot of the people called it were kind of younger, millennials, punk rock kids, outcasts, and kind of expected them to be the ones calling. And the first episode, I got very, very lucky, and it was featured on This American Life. And that episode was a pretty serious one. So then all the callers became serious and a little older and a little more grown up, a little more NPR than public access. So I think the main thing that I had to learn was just, it very, very quickly evolved almost immediately into something that was not comedy. So I had to stop kind of grabbing focus and making jokes. Like it was interesting. It was a little forced. So I do still maintain that even in like the most hard to listen to intense episodes, we usually find a laugh or two. But that was the big adjustment, was just going like, okay, I have to let this be what it wants to be, because it's not me getting messed with by kids in their 20s like I thought it would be.
I feel like that's such a big part of the creative process, is going, okay, so this project is just kind of going to evolve and become its own beast. And at some point it almost feels like a hands-free kind of process, I feel like.
Yeah. And I also had I had to kind of swallow, I wouldn't say bitterness, but almost frustration. Because I'm like, there's other things that I've worked on so hard for so many years. And this thing, I tweet out a phone number, the first one This American Life features, and then it blows up. And I'm like, this is, out of all the things I've done, this is the one that blows up, when I've worked broken my back on so many other things. I tweet out the phone number, that's what gets it. Okay. And I had to learn to not self-sabotage, because I was kind of, I was never bummed at the success of this show, but I was bummed at how much it underlined the lack of success with some other things I was doing. So that was tough. But
can you go into the self-sabotage a little bit more? What do you mean you had to kind of fight that?
Well, I would find myself on the show sometimes expressing that, going like, man, I've worked on my TV show. We fought for, 5 or 6 years to even get a pilot on my show. And then this blows up, and it was funny. But I think it also walked the line of the listeners to Beautiful Anonymous going, well, all right, if you're not that into it, why would we be that into it? And I don't think it ever got to that point. I think they understood it was jokes, but I could feel myself going, okay, like I have some genuine anger or some genuine frustration, but I can't express that on this show, or else people will take it to mean that I'm not into this, when I really am. It's very exciting, but that was the self-sabotage side, was just almost being vocal about how confused I was about the success of it, or even at times kind of not angry, but something close to it. So that was a tough one to swallow, but
that's really nuanced and difficult, because especially in the context of the show that you're doing, to try and talk through that. Because I do feel like it is very important to talk openly about your experience with different creative projects, in order for your own process to be sort of as healthy and keeping you as sane as possible, or at least that's my experience. I definitely was, I used to act and I quit acting, but the show that I was, acted from when I was 6, my mom put me in it until I was 21. And I got on this show that got really popular when I was 14. And by 16, I really, really was just filled with resentment about it. And I resented the level of fame that I had. I resented like being known by people for this thing that I felt like was so cheesy and so bad. And I didn't believe in the work. So I feel like, but that was something that I really felt like I couldn't talk about when I was younger. And it took me a long time to be able to kind of talk openly about it. And even now I've opened up a little bit about that on the podcast, and it's difficult because a lot of people come to me saying like, you made my childhood, you completely made my childhood the thing that it was. And I don't want to ruin their, idea of what the show was and their vision of this like happy thing that they loved. So it's like, well, shoot, how do I talk openly about this thing and share vulnerably, which is something I am very passionate about and very much believe in, while not like ruining these other people's image of a thing. Where I feel like there's quite a difference though, is that I'm assuming you are quite proud of your podcast and believe in it.
I do. You know what I think it is, as we speak about it out loud, like you said, it very much rings true what you said, as far as like you get this thing and then you don't believe it. I believed in all my stuff, but I had kind of built my whole like ethos around striking out. Like I was like the underdog who the people, the fans who rallied around me were like, yeah, dude, you're a loser, but you admit it. That's cool. Like you admit that you have had kind of a career full of misses. And then all of a sudden I'm going, well, now I have a thing that actually hit. How do I'm the guy who's supposed to be a loser. Like, what's going on here? What's up with this? And it's actually, my friend Jason Mantzoukas pulled me aside at one point, and he's like, just so you know, dude, like your TV show made it to cable, and like you got married to, my wife was the band leader on my show. Everybody's like, everybody can see you got like a real pretty wife, and you got a TV show on cable, and like, your podcast is really big now. Like, you might have to get used to the idea of you being like the loser who gets up and dusts yourself off and gets back to work. Like, it's not going to work much longer because it's working out, dude. And everybody can see that. And it was really good advice, and proved very true, because once I started growing out of the lovable loser thing, which was very honest, but I grew out of it, and I went, well, now I'm not sure what to do. So I don't know how to handle life being good. That's never been my thing, life being good. My whole thing is that life is pretty harsh, and I managed to keep fighting through it. My life is not about being good, huh? Just kind of sad to say out loud, but there's a lot of truth to it.
That scares me. I very much relate to just like, oh man, life's brutal, and you gotta fight your way through it and find the humor in the like I very much think finding the humor in the tragedy is all you can do. But I don't know what would happen if my life were to look completely different, and how to own that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's well, that's the other thing too, right? Is like you said with your show, like you're 14, you're on the show that blows up, and then you realize I would imagine it's so much harder to reconcile and so much more confusing when you're a teenager. But I think one lesson that most of us figure out when you do creative stuff is like, oh, we all assume you achieve something that goes well, and then your life feels better. And it's like, oh no, like you might actually just still be like a confused or broken person. And now you fought really hard for a thing and you got it, and it wasn't the antidote to your problems.
Right.
And you're still just kind of confused, which I can't imagine. That I have to say, like you say, finding the lesson in the tragedy, like the idea of people coming up to you and going, oh my God, you were my childhood. And then you go, oh, well, actually I can rile off 10 ways that it was a bad experience off the top of my head. Like, I'm like, there is something darkly funny about that. But I also bet that's really common too with kids who are in your situation.
I don't think I've met a single other person who is a child actor who doesn't have some sort of hilariously, beautifully tragic story to share about their experience in it. It's just such a wild such a wild path. You know what? This makes me wonder. I wonder if people who become sort of known for the thing that they want to be known for, like, I wonder if, let's just say Brad Pitt. He always comes to mind as my example for some reason. But if Brad Pitt like dreamt of being an actor, dreamt of being in the types of movies that he's in, and then he gets to be in the types of movies that he's in, I wonder if that still leads to some emptiness or still leads to some confusion, or if it's just like, or Leonardo DiCaprio, if it's just like, oh, I wanted to do this thing and I became this thing. Or Quentin Tarantino, I wanted to be a filmmaker. I make exactly the movies I want to make, and I'm known for making the kinds of movies I want to make. I wonder if there's some sort, if that's just an easier experience than becoming known for the thing that you didn't expect to be known for, or becoming known for the thing that's not necessarily the thing that you put as much work into as other projects.
It's a really good question. I mean, I definitely went for the latter. I came up at the Upright Citizens Brigade. I started there in 2000 before it was anything. And then all my friends, like Bobby Moynihan is one of my best friends. He's on SNL.
Sure.
Zach Woods is on The Office. One of my best friends back then. And then everybody's going, oh man, you're going to be the next one to get a sitcom. And then cut to a few years later, and I'm like the weird guy on public access who also takes phone calls with strangers. It's like, oh, no one saw that coming. But, in many ways, I think the reason all that happened for me is because I did, for as much as I get confused and as much as I can ponder it and even complain about it, a lot of the way things turned out for me was because I did kind of take a step back and go, I was on a sitcom in 2010 and it bombed. And then I took a step back and I was like, I don't watch sitcoms. Like, I fought so hard to get this thing because my friends had things like this. And then I got it, got creamed, had to read all these reviews, like sitting there knowing my mom is reading reviews that say I'm terrible. And I'm sitting there going, I don't even like the medium of sitcoms. Why am I fighting so hard to be a part of this world? And at that point, I was kind of like, man, if I ever take it on the chin this hard again, it better be for something that I actually like. I think when you bring up like Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, these people who have these unattainable careers, like the thing I wonder about that is you don't really know if something is going to make you feel fulfilled or feel good until you get it. And those things seem so unattainable that you have to fight so hard and spend so many years and be ultra talented and get lucky. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, if you put all your eggs into a basket for a thing that's unattainable, then you attain it, you better hope that it actually solves something or fills in a piece of the puzzle for you. Because if it doesn't, you just spent your whole life fighting for something that didn't work. But I bet that's why there's so many like stories of people who get hooked on pills in the creative world and people who just dive into drinking and craziness. Because I bet it's like, oh, I made it to the top of the mountain and I don't like the view,
Right. Yeah, that's certainly my experience with addiction. I feel like every time I struggled with a lot of alcohol issues and a lot of eating disorders. And for me, if I look back to it, it was suppressing something, not being able to cope with life, with the challenges, with not liking my work or where I was at or whatever. It's just like I didn't have the tools to process my life. And so enter addiction. And that was sort of the most useful coping mechanism for me at the time, which was really sad, but it's just the reality of it. I didn't have better tools.
Yeah. I mean, because if everybody's looking at your life and going, man, you got everything I want. You have everything that everybody dreams for. And then you're the one on the inside going, all right, but I still feel empty. I guess I would imagine it just makes you feel, oh, I guess I'm just broken. I have everything that everybody could ever want. And I'm 16 years old. And for some reason, it's not doing it for me. I guess that must mean I'm broken, And I think that message gets underlined all the time of, people going, wow, you achieved all this stuff. Your life must be perfect. And you're going, actually, it's not, it doesn't feel good at all, So I am pretty proud that I eventually did choose to prioritize things that I knew would make me happy, even if I knew that it would be a little more confusing and a little less traditional and a little bit less like, there's certainly days where I go, I wish I I wish I knew if I had health insurance next year. That would be a good feeling. I have a son now. Be pretty good if I knew I was providing my son with insurance in 11 months. That would be good. But overall, I'm like, pretty psyched. I carved out my own thing and I did it. It's just confusing. And I got to kind of sort out every step for myself because there's no game plan. There's no game plan to where I've landed. So
sure. Can we circle back a little bit to you mentioned the lovable loser kind of persona? It's really interesting to hear because I feel like from the outside, it just seems like you've had so many successes. I feel like I've been watching you be successful for so long, and with your books, with your stand up or one man shows or everything, it just seemed like I get that, that being your persona, but definitely not in terms of that bleeding over into like underdog status career wise. So what was that experience like for you? What made you consider it that?
Well, I think a lot of it was just the time put in because my guess is that I feel like probably no one heard of me until about 2011, 2010. The first thing that made anybody really hear of me outside of like a small New York comedy scene bubble was I was doing a show at UCB and I tweeted at Diddy at the end of 2009 and said, "Hey, you want to come do this show?" And he inexplicably tweeted back and was like, "Yeah, sure. When?" And now I feel like people harass celebrities on Twitter all the time, but it got all this press because Twitter was new and people were like, "Wait, this kid, this like comedian nobody really knows about got through to Diddy. What's going on?" And then he did the show. And that's probably the first time people heard of me was 2010. And at that point, I'd already been regarded as one of the best people in my scene in New York for 10 years. And this was a scene where, I mean, you can go down the list of people who came out of the theater I worked out of, and it's just boom, Jack McBrayer, Ellie Kemper, Aubrey Plaza, like Bobby Moynihan, Horatio Sands. Like I used to be up on every Sunday night doing shows with Amy Poehler and Seth Meyers and Jason Sudeikis, like just a murderer's row. And so from my perspective, it was 10 years of being around people who were crushing it and me being the one who wasn't crushing it. So I think by the time I kind of entered the public consciousness, I had a real fire in my gut and a real feeling of, man, like I spent 10 years waiting, and I'm not an arrogant guy, but sitting there going, man, I had a lot of near misses. I had that sitcom. I almost got hired for this writing staff. I almost got hired for that. I'm up on stage and I'm doing shows where I'm as good as anybody. And, a bunch of them are writers at SNL, and I had like a 2-week guest writer contract at SNL and they didn't hire me. So I had a lot of, I'm a pretty mild mannered guy and I think I'm pretty nice, but I was also raised in North Jersey, like I was also raised to just be like, yeah, everyone in my neighborhood. You ask anybody, any field they're in the neighborhood where I grew up, and they'd probably be going, nobody believes in me. Fuck them, pardon my French. But like, that was just, right. I have that in me. I'm like an Irish Catholic from North Jersey who grew up feeling like nobody is particularly interested in people like me. And then I had 10 years that felt like that validated that. So when I came out and started doing it on my own terms, I think I was just like, hi, I'm the person that's been trying for 10 years and hasn't gotten anywhere. Is that you? Do you feel like that in your life? Because that's who I am. And I'm not going to pretend it isn't anymore. Like SNL doesn't want me? Fine. This sitcom bombed out? Fine. Like, here's who I am, really. Like, let's go on public access TV and just fuck around and make it insane. And that was kind of the mission statement. And it was very, very real. And then the people who found my work, I think very much felt like that in their lives too. So the lovable loser thing was built on sort of like 10 years of anonymity. And then I don't think my show didn't get a pilot on Comedy Central till 2014. And then they passed. It didn't get picked up on a network till 2016. So it was another 6 years of fighting for that. So it's that thing, right? It's that thing of the person who appears to be, the person who appears to be an overnight sensation, I would say a lot of the time probably wasn't. Sometimes they were. Sometimes it's somebody who's like, I just graduated college and moved to LA and now I'm the second lead on How I Met Your Mother. Like, I'm sure, I don't know if anybody from How I Met Your Mother has that story, but there's some people who have that story. Got out of acting school and
Scorsese picked me
up. 10 minutes later, I was opposite Jennifer Lawrence in a Scorsese film. But you and I both know the reality is someone who appears out of nowhere probably fought hard for many years to get that chance. And I feel like I'm rambling. I apologize, but
no, there's so much in this that I want to touch on. I feel like this. Well, I mean, first off, you mentioned not being that arrogant, and I definitely struggle with arrogance. I think that I get this idea of like, well, I'm just as good as anybody, or I'm better than that person who has a thing. So why don't I have a thing? And battling those thoughts, I feel like can get so difficult. And I know that they don't help anything. I know they don't help the work. I know they don't help my mental health. I know they don't help my relationship. Like there's no good that comes from those thoughts, but they're very real. And I think it is hard, especially in this business, because there's so much randomness and there's so much fighting involved for no return that it's inspiring to hear that you like overcame that and used that kind of energy, or what sounds like adjacent to that energy, by just being honest and being vulnerable and just get like, it almost sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were just kind of peeling off layers as the time went.
Very much so. Very much so. I think a lot of what finally clicked for me, looking back on it, was me just kind of giving up in a public way. I think I was just like, let's burn it down because it's not working and I'm tired of feeling self-conscious. So I have to be the only person in human history who was the star of a sitcom for 10 episodes and then less than a year later was hosting a public access TV show. Like that's a cool story now. And people go, oh man, but that's only a cool story to people because it worked out. Back then, people were concerned for me. I had friends of mine who helped me on that show. My good friend who wound up being the showrunner of my show for its entire run had another person in our sphere of influence pull him aside and say, do not attach yourself to Gethard's midlife crisis. Like this is going to be a disaster. Don't put your name on it. So,
whoa.
Yeah. Like, and that's a person who is a friend of mine. I don't think he knows that I know he said that, but that was someone who was at my wedding years later. You know, that was somebody who I worked closely with, like a real collaborator who pulled another person aside and said, because I had asked him, you want to be a part of this? We've been working together so much. He said, no, I think I'm good. I'm busy with my own stuff. Then pulled someone else aside and was like, you don't want to do this, man. It's going to be sad.
Oh my God.
So yeah, I mean, it really was. When you say peeling back layers and getting vulnerable, I was just going like, I don't want to play the game anymore. I'm just going to go. The only platforms I can figure out that will let me be me have always turned out to be the ones where there's no regulation. Podcasting, go try your own thing. And it was public access TV. The amount of times I've like sat in pitch meetings with people and I'll go, I'll have people sit me down and go, oh, you do like the most innovative, unique stuff. We saw this thing and that thing you did. And I'll go, oh yeah, I want to do something like this or that or this. And they'll go, oh, that's not really our thing. And I started to realize, oh, there's people who ask for meetings with me just so they can feel cool. Like, so they can feel like they talk to like someone who's like risky or did things in a weird way. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I just flew to Los Angeles to quote unquote take meetings. And this meeting was for you you had no intention. You can't do the type of stuff I'm pitching. Like you just wanted to feel cool. Like that's happened to me. I once appeared on a game show that was, it was at midnight. It's not around anymore. And one of the producers there pulled me aside and was like, just so you know, like your show is the most watched show in writers' rooms right now. And I was like, oh, that's cool. That's flattering. He goes, no, I'm warning you. Everyone, like you're doing things your own way and the people are trying to rip you off. He was like, people are trying to find the way to do what you're doing that will actually make money and get ratings. Like, Like people would just say stuff like that to me.
Oh my God.
So I've just always had to do it my own way. And I'm just like, great. And I think I am kind of at my best too. And I'm like, great. Like, you want to push me further out of the system? That's fine. As long as I can find insurance, that's good. Keep getting me mad. Yeah. Fine. Yes. And if I didn't need to get my health insurance through SAG, if there was a way to get health insurance in any other way, I'd be even further off the grid, So I
like that. I want to get further off the grid.
I can't tell if I'm coming off as a big crybaby right now or like a fighter. I think I'm a good blend. I think I'm a 50-50 mix of fighter and crybaby. I think that's my personality.
I would have totally gone fighter, and I feel inspired. I feel like excited. This is really cool.
Good. That's good.
When everybody around you, you mentioned from UCB and everybody's kind of like blowing up. Did you feel jealous? Did you make a lot of comparisons? I definitely struggle with jealousy.
Oh, endlessly.
It's interesting with everybody being in the same field or pursuing what you want to do. I went from the first show that I was on that I already resented to then doing a spinoff, which was just the worst. I agreed to do the spinoff because long story, but my mom was dying and she wanted to know that my future was safe. So I was like, okay, I'll do the spinoff for mom.
Wow.
Really shouldn't have done it. But
I mean, that sounds sad in like 9 different ways. I'm so sorry you went through that.
No. Yeah, it was sad, but also funny that my mom, her main focus really was she'd have the chemo drip in her arm and be like, are you doing the spinoff? Like it was really, truly her priority was not her life, but my stardom. Her priorities were confused, as were mine. But so then I do this spinoff and I'm like, okay, well, you know what? At least I'm the main character. At least maybe there's a chance that somebody will see this and be like, oh, she kind of has some degree of talent. We'll put her as a supporting role in some other film. And like in my mind, I could see kind of like some sort of a future that I could maybe potentially, hopefully not struggle with and be okay with. And I get on the show and a couple weeks before we're about to shoot, they're like, oh, so we want to kind of change it from, into like a 2-hander because we think that will be like a better look. And the person we want you to be on the show with is Ariana Grande. And she was on a different show. And she wasn't yet Ariana Grande. She was just kind of Ariana Grande. But through the course of that first season, she became Ariana Grande. And,
and her name was already Ariana Grande.
It already was.
Even if she's not already who she's become, that's just intimidating right there.
It is, right?
Your name is Ariana Grande and this is equal balance. This does not bode well.
Her name sounds so high status, and mine is like Jennette McCurdy. It sounds just like this rough and tumble, like foster child type.
Yes,
name. Right?
like an Irish child in Hell's Kitchen in the 1930s, like a Great Depression era Hell's Kitchen resident. Like you were raised like your uncles and aunts used to make you sleep in a dresser drawer because the McCurdys didn't have much.
I literally did sleep on a Costco mat as a child, so not too far off from the
dresser drawer. There you go.
But so during the course of this first season, she just blows up, and that's not even the career that I wanted. No part of me wanted to be a pop star, but watching that happen was so hard for me. Just feeling like, well, when is it going to be my turn? It's just never going to be my turn. And I know how crazy and spoiled and privileged that sounds, being that I was on a television show. I completely get it, but also I think I'd be doing a disservice to not be honest that was to myself, to not be honest that was my experience, because that was something that I had to fight with and struggle and try and overcome.
Well, it's something I've discovered, my version of it. Everything you're saying rings so true to me, because it's like that thing when you go, I'm on a TV show sitting here going, wait, why does she have more than I do? And you understand how that comes off. But it's that very American thing of professional achievement defines your worth. And that's true for every industry, let alone one where there's cameras pointing at you, which I've experienced, let alone where there's cameras pointing at you and you're a child who hasn't had a chance to figure yourself out yet, which you've experienced. But this idea that you you're you go do good at your job and you climb the corporate ladder and then you're an executive VP, you know, like, and now you've done it, you know, or like in our industry, okay, like now you're the fifth one on the call sheet. And then the next project, you're the fourth one on the call sheet. And now it's a two-hander. It's like, for some people, I'm sure that does lead to fulfillment. But I think more and more what I've experienced personally, and the reason I think anybody has ever cared about my work is because I think I've realized I could be like when my friends were getting cast on SNL and getting hired to write on SNL, when people who I taught them in their level 2, I taught Aubrey Plaza in her level 2 improv class. And like a year later, she's on Parks and Recreation. And I was so proud of her and so excited for her. But just like you were saying, there's this feeling of like, oh, there's actual dread. I'm now feeling guilty because I feel very good for my friend and my student. And I'm also feeling dread for me. But you could have given me those things back then. And I look back and realize I thought those were what I needed. And what I now know is those would have been nice and those would have been good paychecks. I still would have just been a fundamentally messed up person who hadn't sorted it out yet. You know, I would have I had a couple panic attacks. I would have had them anyway. I would have had them if I was the fifth person on the call sheet or the first person on the call sheet. I was broken. I had a bad childhood. People beat the shit out of me. I watched my brother get his ass kicked by bullies. And I was a small prepubescent boy whose last name spells out Gethard. And I was getting in fist fights with kids literally a foot taller than me. And no adults gave a shit. And the infrastructure failed. Like, cool. Get me a writing job on SNL. I'm still going to have to deal with that sometimes. And having a cool job is the thing that's going to make me. It's funny. Like, I just moved back to New Jersey after 16 years in New York. And between chasing my career and having a lot of mental issues, I kind of went off the grid from high school friends and college friends. And I remember in my head, I'm going, I like had a bunch of my high school friends over to my new house. And they're people who I've kept in touch with. This is the first time we were all together in a while, let alone me around a lot of them. And I'm sitting here, I'm going, you know, in my head this whole time, I was going, I'm going to go out here and on behalf of the kids I grew up with, all the other kids who had it shitty, I'm going to go kick the shit out of the world. And then I come back and it's like, they're psyched for me and they're like proud that I went off and did what I did, but also like, they're like, oh yeah, but no, like I also got like a good job as an insurance actuary 11 years ago and really happy. And I have a kid and I live near a lake and I own a couple kayaks and me and my kid go kayaking. I haven't been sitting around thinking about you walking this fucking hero's journey that you've had in your own mind the whole time. Like no one, it's pretty cool that you did what you did, but it's not like we really give a shit. It's not like there's a soundtrack to your life and the music swells and that we're all back in the old neighborhood going like, you got him, Geth. It's not like Rudy, you know, it's not like you're all watching and like raising a glass at the bar and then the bully's at the other end of the bar and you guys give him a stare down and he has to begrudgingly give you a nod and admit that he was the asshole. Like, that's not what's happening. Like, he has kids. He's fine too. We're all in our 40s. Like, it's fine. Point being, like I said, achievement was never going to fix me. I had to go to therapy and get on medication for that. And that would have happened if I was striking out at UCB like I was. It would have happened if I was getting every job I dreamed of. I would have had those breakdowns as it was. And I often actually guess if SNL had hired me as a writer, I bet I would have fallen apart harder mentally. Because again, no offense, and I have many friends who work there now and who have worked there over the years. I don't watch the show.
Right.
I'm sitting here going, why didn't they hire me? It's like, well, maybe because I haven't actually watched. I'll like watch David S. Pumpkins on YouTube when I hear it blew up. I'll watch Lazy Sunday when it blew up. I haven't watched an episode of SNL in like 5 years before they gave me this writing opportunity. So why am I so shocked? I only want this for the status. My sitcom bombed. I don't watch sitcoms. I don't like them. I'm like, even when when my talk show got canceled, I'm like, yeah, it was on cable. I cut the cord 4 years ago. I haven't had cable in 4 years. Like, it's fine if those systems don't embrace me, because big secret, I don't like them. I don't pay for cable. So it's okay if a cable network doesn't want to give me a show. That was the type of revelation that made me feel a lot better. Yeah. Sorry. Rant over.
No. What is it about wanting to be sort of embraced by this higher status? I mean, I get it. Obviously, I relate to it very much, but I wonder that too. Of like, why is it that, back to in my past when I didn't like acting. I never liked acting. I never wanted to act in the first place. Why did I literally care about an acting job for my acting career future for a career that I hated doing? It made me so anxious. I felt like I was going to, explode every time before a take. I didn't like it.
It's all that capitalism, right? It's like, well, you've got the glitz and glamour and the money. So how can this be bad? And it's like, because I don't like it. And that's okay too. Maybe I want to go study to be an electrician because that seems more exciting, but we're not allowed to think that way.
Right.
Because everything's status and money, everything's status and money. So I do feel very lucky that I got to kind of break the algorithm of that a little bit. And like I said, some of it was just a public meltdown that people were very concerned about, but luckily it worked.
I really appreciate how much you incorporate your own mental health struggles throughout your past in your work. Was that something that you were hesitant to do? Were you like, oh, fuck, I don't know if I want to talk about this? Or was that something that just as soon as you started to overcome them, you were like, you know what? No, I have to talk about this. It just is so compelling. What was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, for years, I started in UCB in 2000, and I was pretty quickly regarded. I was 20 years old when I started there, and it pretty quickly was regarded as like, oh, this is like the young buck. It's like the young prodigy of improv. And, there's been a few people like John Gemberling was that guy before me. Zach Woods was that guy after me. These like young people who show up and just it clicks. But that first 6 or 7 years, if you ever saw me do an improv show, I played a lot of characters who were depressed or characters who probably, I did a lot of improv scenes of people who would take medication and it would affect them in weird ways because that's what I was scared of, but I was a character. And then around 2007, I started a storytelling show at UCB. And that's when I started getting very honest. And even then, they were stories that I felt very comfortable telling. But luckily, there was a group of other comedians, Curtis Gwynn, Anthony Tamanik, and John Flynn are the ones that come to mind, where we would do this storytelling show together every month. And it just became sort of like an unspoken challenge of like, who's going to put more on the table this month? Like you revealed, oh, Curtis, you told this story about, your life falling apart after your mom died last month. Okay. Like, oh, Anthony, you followed it up with the time you, when you were in LA and addicted to meth and picked up a prostitute and took them to a party at the Jim Henson company where you worked. Okay. Who can go bigger this month? And I found those guys to be very empowering in that challenge. And I remember specifically telling a story in part of that show that was met with silence about a night when I had a night where I was really in a lot of danger to myself. And I called my ex-girlfriend who had alienated so many times. And I didn't know who else to call. I called her and I said, I need help. I'm fucked up. I'm broken. It's for real. And she said, I'm gonna call if you don't go home and wake up your mom and tell her what's going on, I'm gonna tell her, I'm gonna call her in the morning. She's gonna get a call from your high school girlfriend saying you're suicidal. Like, so you better do it. And I did that as the theme of the show that month was the greatest night of my life. We were supposed to be telling stories about the greatest nights of our lives. So everybody else was like, here's this sexual conquest, or here's this situation where I wound up living high on the hog in a way where nobody saw coming, where I stumbled into this crazy experience on a private jet. And then I'm like, oh, I finally admitted that I was going to kill myself and somebody told on me. That was the greatest night of my life because I had to just kind of admit that rock bottom was here. Mm. And that was terrifying, let alone to be met with silence. But it did change everything. And the thing that was most eye-opening was I started talking about that stuff on stage. Like I said, 2006, 2007. And I am really, really proud that like even my HBO special was all about a suicide attempt and my relationship with my shrink. Mm-hmm. That came out in 2017. And I think if you put it out today, it would not get the press it got. I don't think it would feel as shocking because I'm really, really happy. I think it's now a lot more okay to admit that you are on pills or seeing a shrink, or I think that conversation has shifted. And if I was any small part in that, I'm thrilled. But what would happen is when I first started talking about this stuff on stage, I mean, when I started doing Career Suicide, that show, I'm not kidding when I say I would get off stage and cry. Probably the first 12, 13, 14 times I did it because I would just see people in the audience making these faces like, oh my God, why is he talking about this? Why is he doing that? And scary to realize, oh my God, these people are scared. And I'm trying to find a way to make this palatable and sections of it funny. And I'm scaring them. This is terrifying. It's like validating all the fears I had about why I didn't even want to talk about this in the first place. But then what would happen is someone would wait for me after the show and go, you know, I went through something similar, or, you know, the ones that were most insane were, you know, I remember once so clearly this couple saying to me, you know, like, we have an 8-year-old son and his doctors are really concerned and think he needs to be on like medications for his mental stuff, and we've resisted it because he's a kid. And they were like, we're not going to say that your show is going to say we're going to go put him on the medications, but we're going to go and have that conversation again and actually listen to the doctor this time because we realized we wrote them off, you know? Or I remember I once did the show in Chicago and I did a Q&A afterwards. That was Judd Apatow produced the show, and he didn't really give me notes so much as he said, I want you to do this show on the road and do Q&As. It'll be eye-opening. That will guide the writing. And I did it in Chicago, and a woman got up and said, my brother killed himself and I've never been able to wrap my head around it. And then your show just made me feel like I know a little bit more about what he was thinking, and it helped. So it's like, yeah, it was terrifying to talk about that stuff. It was like lonely and terrifying, but then, you know, you have a room with 80 people in it when you're workshopping the show, and 78 of them visibly hate it and are uncomfortable. But then the other 2 tell you, I'm going to see the best way to help my son, or I understand my deceased family member. It's like, okay, that outweighs those other 78. Like that, those 2 are worth more than the 78 are scary, you know?
Absolutely. How much did it change from those initial workshops to then what you taped with HBO?
It's a really good question. A lot. There was a story I had about a drunken rampage that made me realize I was an alcoholic. That was there from the start. The story about the story about actually crashing a car in an effort to hurt myself, that was there from the start, because that was kind of I was opening for Mike Birbiglia, and he was asking me about my depression. I told him that story in confidence. He's like, that's hilarious. Tell it on stage. I was like, dude, this is the worst thing that I've ever done to myself. He's like, tell it. Those 2 stories were there from start to finish. And I would say the rest of it, like some of it came and stuck quickly, but most of it was just, I think I worked on the show for 3 years before we taped the HBO special, including like the Edinburgh Fringe Festival where I did it 29 nights in a row. And my director was there and would give me notes every night. And we'd meet every day to rewrite parts. And then we'd do that an off-Broadway run where I did it 8 days a week and would just rewrite every night. So
wow.
Really up until the HBO taping, it was changing on a still like multiple times a week. I'd be changing stuff.
I definitely think it moved the dial significantly in terms of like talking openly about mental health struggles. I luckily the conversation's in a place now where everybody seems to be talking about it, and it's much more just okay to say these things, which is like encouraging. But I mean, yeah, 3 years ago, that was a different landscape. Like that must have been terrifying. My God. And
there's so many people, even in the comedy field. I mean, Maria Bamford has done so much more than I am. Like the mental illness happy hour podcast, like so many, Mark Maron spoke a lot about his mental stuff, his addiction stuff. Gary Goldman just put out a fantastic special called The Great Depression. Like, I think there are people who are more talented than I, who have led the charge, but I am happy to be a small part of it. And like I said, like just going on the road, and to this day, have somebody come up to me. Even the stuff that's really meaningful to this day is because I was a New Yorker at the time, still, in the Northeast, in North Jersey. And so many people are in therapy. So I'm doing it in Manhattan off Broadway. And I'm like, this feels hard here. And then I go and do stand up on the road, and I'm in Salt Lake City. And somebody comes up to me and goes, I watched your show and I got into therapy. And then I talk with them a little bit, and they're like, yeah, I mean, I live in Salt Lake City. I was raised Mormon. It's a much different culture. It's far more conservative than the culture I lived in. And it was hard for me. And then they tell me I spoke about it openly and it helped them. I'm like, oh, holy shit, that feels amazing, because it wasn't easy for me. And I can see it was so much harder for you. So if I helped get you there, then I feel like I can, put that in my obituary, because that's one of the main things I want to be remembered for,
That person who approached you may have been me. I grew up Mormon.
Really?
Yeah.
So, I would imagine, then, like,
oh yeah.
People meet me after show. I did a show in St. Louis, and I had my friend who opens for me. I was actually the first time he opened for me on the road, and a woman came up to me after the show and burst out crying and ran away. And he was like, what was that? And I was like, it happens sometimes, get used to it. And yeah, in Salt Lake City, a lot of people came out for my shows, and I was very flattered by that. But I realized, like, oh, there's a significant portion here of like kids who grew up Mormon and eventually became punk rockers. And I was a piece of the puzzle for them. I somehow caught on with that. That's the exact type of I'm like, yeah, True TV. My show's never going to get huge ratings, True TV. But if you want people who reject conservative religious faiths to dye their hair purple and get a facial piercing, I'm your guy. That's my demographic right there. I can bring you that. Oh, that doesn't fly. That doesn't sell advertise. Oh, great. Got it. Good. Yes, I'll be on my way. Thank you.
Can we talk a little bit about Planet Scum?
Sure.
Can you explain to listeners what that is, when it started?
Yeah, I'm so happy to talk about that, because so my I built my TV show on public access, and it jumped to cable. And when it got canceled, I realized one of the things I was most proud of is when we had a writer's room, I was able to hire people, and I was able to go to the comedy scene where I see so many brilliant people who are non-traditional, and they're in the same boat I was in for so many years, just saying, I'm doing the most unique, innovative stuff. How do I find a job? So like, I'll name job, and I take no credit for their skills or abilities, but I gave Jo Firestone her first job. If you're a fan of underground comedy, like Joe's a treasure. Julio Torres and Ana Fabrega from Los Spookies, they both were writers on my show. I'm like proud to be able to drop these names that I was able to give these people some money on their way up when they needed to pay their rent. And they were clearly the coolest people. So my show got canceled, and I knew that's one of the things I would miss the most. So Planet Scum is it had started in another iteration before the quarantine. And one of the only silver linings for the quarantine for me was we started a Twitch channel to try to keep putting up these sort of comedians who are really great, who need a platform. So 6 nights a week, there's different comedians hosting shows. I host the Wednesday night show, but pretty much every night of the week, you can tune in and see someone cool who you probably maybe have not heard of before. People who are a little off the grid, but who just do the most innovative stuff, and who I think are going to be the people in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years that are going to be the ones that bust out. And right now, it really is beneficial for all of us weirdos to just go, let's just share a Twitch channel so everybody knows if you want the weird stuff, if you kind of want the New York scene centric weirdos, here's where you go. Here's where you hang out at this Twitch channel.
So it's like an online platform for live comedy.
Yeah. We, Robbie Hoffman has a show on Thursday nights. Robbie was a writer on my show. Such a brilliant, hilarious, wackadoo comedian. And I had started doing it Wednesday nights just to have a thing to do. Robbie was a guest on my show. I was like, that was fun. And the people doing it with you made it easy. Can I do a show? And we started talking. It was like, oh, there's great venues. Like New York Union Hall is like the small venue comedians just love workshop and stuff at. In LA, I feel like Dynasty Typewriter is one of the venues that it's just like, if you know underground, like you're just going to go see a mix of like established people and people coming up. And it's just sort of like, let's build a digital version of that. Let's not worry about trying to make this have huge numbers, but let's make it the digital version of a real life venue where you'd go to experiment. Let's do that, you know? And I think it has built into that in a nice way. And I'm really excited to see all these comedians using it. And it's also really nice for me too, because I'm older now and I did my TV show and I've done a lot of stuff that was me driving it. And this, I was just able to say, all right, I'll pay to set it all up and I'll do my show. But then really, I'm just one of 6 nights of shows. Like I'm able to set up this thing that emulates the way I did it. But it's not about me anymore. It's about all these other people. And my real hope is that I have maybe attracted some fans over the years who dig this type of comedy. And I can go, all right, if you liked me, I'm old now. I live in the suburbs and I work on my lawn a lot. Here's the other people who are still kind of younger and angrier and have that fire in their guts and who are going to carry that torch. And then maybe for those comedians, it won't take them, they won't have to be on public access TV for 5 years before someone notices, because we all team up and do it together and kind of tell them, no, you have to pay attention.
Was this the result of COVID then, or pre-COVID?
Yeah, it was. Wow. I had started, I went back to public access and I was doing a thing where it was like, I would present one of these comedians each week and they would do their own hour of TV where it's just like, hey, I can give you a 3-camera studio where you can take live phone calls, do it literally whatever you want, no content restrictions. And that was a fun experiment, but it wasn't totally clicking. And then COVID, it was like, well, let's just do it online. And then all of a sudden it was like, yes, this is, as far as me helping to promote and draw attention to some of the weirder comedians, this is the venue. So for as much of a hellscape as 2020 has been, that is one thing that's been exciting about it for me.
Wow.
Is good old Planet Scum.
I love the name. It's so great.
Thanks. Although again, I can't ever avoid the trap. This was not intentional, but it's like my last name spells Gethard. And then I realized that this spells planets come. And many people on Twitter have been like, wait, are you really running a thing called Planets Come? And I'm like, no, I should have really broken this down phonetically. Yet again, I've done something unintentionally humiliating. Great.
I want to be mindful of your time. Do you mind if I ask you 2 quick little wrap-up questions?
Sure. And you've already been mindful of my time. The problem is that I can't answer anything in less than 7 minutes time. So it's on me.
No, it's the answers have been so thorough and honest, and I appreciate that.
Thorough indeed. Yes.
No, the honesty is great.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, if you could give some advice to listeners who might be feeling like they want to pursue something, but the thing that, or let's say they've been pursuing something for a long time and they're just like, I don't feel like I fit in the mold. I don't fit in the box for what the golden ticket is for achieving that thing. What advice would you give them to kind of just get into themselves and create whatever speaks most to them, and kind of how to just beat to their own drum and be close to themselves as opposed to trying to, attain the whatever thing might be that they're trying to attain?
I mean, it's really, I've thought about it a lot, and I've always tried to support younger comedians, and I've read some very nice things from younger comedians who are doing good right now, that they watched my stuff when they were literally in middle school, which is like, both makes me feel like an old man and is mind blowing. But I think some of the things I've always said that ring true to me are, if you are making stuff that feels like it isn't fitting the mold, and you feel like you're kind of running into a wall over and over again, trying to get anybody to notice, just keep in mind that gatekeepers are largely, I know this is mean, but they're largely kind of dummies. And when you meet one of the gatekeepers, there's a guy named Alex Fumero who worked at Fusion TV. He worked at HBO for a while. He's like a brilliant guy who was in that role for a while, where I'm like, I'm going to hang on to you for dear life because I think you're actually smart and get it and funny. And you'll find those people eventually in the industry, right? Where you just go, I'm going to hang on to you for dear life because it seems like you actually have good taste and understand what I'm going for and have advice I like on how to translate it to the industry. You're the one who can be the bridge to help me. I found a couple of those people eventually. Judd Apatow eventually noticed me. That goes a long way, but that took 14 years, 15 years. Mm. In the meantime, I think one of the only things you can do is just make shit you believe in. Don't over strategize. Don't go, what do I have to change about myself or my work to get them to like it? Yep. Just as loudly as you can, make your shit and shout to the hilltops about it. Because what I've always said is, you might be in a void, feeling like you're yelling, but then all of a sudden, someone hears it. And you realize, if you're an artist who's kind of doing some strange stuff that doesn't fit the mold, oh, the people finding it, they're that too. My TV show, I remember we were doing it on public access, taking phone calls, and people would literally call. The first couple months, pretty much the only phone calls we got were from friends of mine personally, or from people going, I'm watching in Manhattan. This sucks. What is it? Legit. And then all of a sudden we get our first call from New Jersey, our first call from Connecticut, from people going, yeah, I like this, man. All of a sudden we get calls. I remember so distinctly our first call from Canada. Someone's like, I get it. And then, by the end, we're getting calls from Sweden. Our pilot for Comedy Central, people flew from Brazil to come attend the pilot taping, from Honolulu, Hawaii. I would get messages from someone who literally said, I live in China and I have to hack a firewall to watch your show. And one of the things I hope people hear right now is that's me now in 2020 going, I remember those individual emails from 2011, 2012. I remember those individual phone calls. And then what happens is I stick to my guns, and it goes from that first call in Canada to, we can go do a live version of our show in Canada and there's 500 people that show up to watch it. And you go, right. And it started with that one person who got it. And then they started telling their friends. And then that's how it worked. I can, like, we get a call from Australia. And it's one guy. And then I come to figure out over the years, I have a fan base in Australia. I've never even been there. And it started with that one guy. Mm. So for me, it feels like, own your stuff. Don't apologize for it. Shout about it. It feels like no one's listening. But if you shout loud enough, someone will hear it. And that will be the one person who gets your back. And that person will get your back and it'll spread. And one of the coolest things is that sometimes, like in my experience, it was the other artists. Like, I had just been on that bombed out sitcom. And like I told you, people are pulling aside people who want to help me work on it, going, don't do this. It's going to make you look bad. People were not into it in the comedy scene. I was a pariah a little bit. But you know who flocked to it was musicians. I started having bands on my show, and all of a sudden they're going, this feels like the first couple years of MTV, man. Like this feels like old school David Letterman. This is awesome. And all of a sudden the musicians had my back, and it became this big wave of enthusiasm because they were cool and their fans all start finding us, and the show feels a little cooler. So if you keep shouting to the hilltops about the stuff you're proud of, you will find some fans and supporters. You will find some fellow artists, and you will cobble together this little coalition, and then you'll turn around and all of a sudden it won't be as little as it used to be. And that is the number one thing I can think of, because I can say very honestly, even when my show was eventually bought by 2 different cable networks, and I think in both cases, they were straight up going, we don't totally understand what this is, but we can't deny that someone flew from fucking Brazil to be at your pilot tape. Like whatever you're doing, it's getting that. So we can't explain it, but we also can't deny it. So that's the way to make your stuff undeniable. It's just do it. And then I would also suggest, remember those people. Like there was a kid who wrote me a letter from Ireland in 2011 about my show and how much it meant to him. I remember his name. It was James. I won't say his last name, but I remember his name. You know, like that guy from Honolulu, he eventually was a PA on our show. He moved to New York. We hired him. We were like, yeah, you've been around since the beginning, you know?
That's amazing.
Yeah. Like,
oh my God.
Like I'll go, even on Planet Scum the other night, this guy calls. I go, wait, you're Joe. He's like, yeah, how'd you know that? I'm like, well, I remember you on Facebook posting that when our show was redistributed on this tiny network in Canada, you were the guy, you worked at that network. He's like, you remember that? I'm like, yeah, you helped me. I remember you. So never take anyone for granted. If you're a weirdo, that's the other thing. If someone shows you even an ounce of support, do not take it for granted. Remember their name. Remember that they're a friend. Don't get too big for your britches, because if you were frustrated then, they might be frustrated now, and you got to give it back. You got to help them out too.
That's wonderful. It makes me think of, I have this friend she's a young filmmaker. She's 23 and she dropped out of high school to pursue filmmaking. And I just think her work she's amazing. And I think her work is so special and unique and specific, and has such a weird fucking voice. It's so weird, and I love it. And over the past bit, I hear her saying things kind of that sound like she's trying to make it more universal and more mainstream and more, palatable to the networks, and just a lot of industry talk. And I really hope, I hope she listens to this, because I really think, I think her work was so special. And I think she should keep shouting it from the rooftops and not change a damn thing. Like, I think she's so good as she is, and just keep doing her. I think that's such good advice. And then, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I concur. And if your friend is hearing this, I would just say, keep in mind, like, you can go to them and you might make it, or you can make them come to you and you might make it. And if you do the second one, you got them by the balls. If you do the first one, you might make a lot of stuff that's good, that you're proud of. You might even make a lot of money, but like, they'll always be able to tell you. Whereas if you make them come to you with the stuff you're really proud of, they don't get to say a word. They have to get out of your way. So to each their own. You know?
My God, that's so great. And then lastly, I just want to know what you want out of your future. Is there anything you feel like you're chasing now with all the information you have, all the knowledge you have, or what does that look like for you?
It's the big struggle. I just turned 40 in May, and I'm clearly having a midlife crisis, like undeniably. But it's also, my TV show got canceled a couple years ago. I still sit around every week. I'll have a day where I sit around going, man, I really struck out. And then I go, no, I had 47 episodes of a show on cable. I've written 3 books. I did an HBO special that had an off-Broadway run attached to it. Like, I have this podcast that has hundreds of thousands of listeners. Like, and I did all that before I was 40. Why do I still sit around feeling like I'm a failure? And one of the things that I'm really struggling with right now is, like, I don't really know what else I want to fight for. All those were things I felt like I needed to fight for.
Wow.
And I'm not really good without some fire in my guts to go get it. But I think I'm also, sometimes I feel a little irrelevant compared to a couple years ago. and that makes me insecure. But then sometimes I'm able to remove the insecurity from it, and I go, well, all those things I did allowed me to buy this nice house in a nice school district where I get to play on the lawn with my son. And it's a nicer house than I got to grow up in, just like my parents raised me in a house that was nicer than their houses. I'm like, the worst thing that happens is I work on my lawn and I play with my son. I did a lot of stuff. By the age of 40. And now maybe I just need to find a way to pay the mortgage until I'm 65 and just enjoy it a little. I'm trying to realize that. I think my dad would be the first to say he worked his ass off, but he probably could have done a better job of slowing down and remembering that you actually do that so you can enjoy life. So I think I am begrudgingly realizing that maybe it's time to enjoy life instead of fighting for projects. And then my guess is that I will get to that place which feels a little zen, and all of a sudden something will hit me and I'll go, that's it. That's what'll teach these motherfuckers not to mess with me, which has always been the mentality that serves me well. Even though there's not really any motherfuckers out there, I just have to pretend there are in order to stay motivated.
There's always a mental bully in a puffer coat.
Oh yeah, big time. And he's sitting in some office on some lot in Los Angeles, and I got to prove to him that I'm smarter than him.
I'm a fighter too, naturally. Like I always feel like I'm fucking fighting for something. I mean, I paid my family's bills when I was a kid. It's like for my whole life, it was like
wild.
You gotta fucking get it. And this like teeth grinding anxiety of chase.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. And I wonder what life would look like without it, but I don't know how to not have it. But what you said really resonated with me and seems like something that I want to try to include in any way that I can.
I really am into the idea of building a smaller life. Like I'm working right now on starting some new podcasts that I am in my mind going, these will be better with a smaller audience. Like one of them is with two friends from high school. I put out an album last year that was all jokes about New Jersey, where I grew up. Where I'm going, it would feel really nice to me to just be super embraced by New Jersey, to know that if I need gigs, there's 5 or 6 cities in New Jersey where I can just go drive to them and people will go, that's our guy. And I just have this feeling, I've had this feeling for a couple of years that we're going to see more of that, of people going, I don't want to live in New York, LA, or maybe Chicago. Those cities move at a pace I don't like, but I can go make art in Iowa City, and there's the neighborhood full of artists there, and I can pay 1/8 the rent I would pay in New York or Los Angeles, and people are going to love me in the Midwest, and that will support me, and I'll be happy with that, and I don't need to be a millionaire. I have a feeling you're going to see that, of people going, I want to live a life more on my terms. It's going to mean I'm a little smaller, but it's going to mean I'm embraced in a specific region or amongst a certain clique of fans. Like, I feel like you already start to see it online, where there's some people who are massive, and then there's some people who are paying their bills going, I'm going to have a YouTube. Like I was on like one of the spinoff series of Hot Ones, where I'm like, that seems to be a YouTube show where they've made a huge industry out of how much they like chicken wings. I think that's awesome. Like there's going to be people who I think can go, there's probably people who are going, people who are making their money off of how much they know about Magic the Gathering. I think that's awesome. And I think even for performing artists, it's going to be, maybe I don't need to be a movie star if I can be like the theater actor who's an institution in Seattle. Like maybe that would be awesome, to just be this region's go-to person. I know that that's existed forever, but I have a feeling you're going to see people making that the goal more than, let me go and be the next Brad Pitt, like you said. That's a lot of pressure. Maybe I can be maybe I can be just New Jersey's less hot Brad Pitt. Maybe I can be that. Maybe I can be the Northeast's less appealing Leonardo DiCaprio. and make a lot less money than I would if I went for it in a bigger way, but be so much happier, a little poorer, a lot happier. I have a feeling there's going to be people aiming for that in the coming years. And I think that's a really good thing for all of our mental health.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on again. I've gotten so much out of this conversation, and your perspective and insight and just means so much to me that you've shared so much, and I'm such a fan of your work and
oh, well, thank you. And I have to say I got a lot out of it too. And it was nice, usually you talk to people and it's like the same 3 or 4 things, but we got to go all over the map, and thanks for letting me ramble.
I'm glad. Thanks, man.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah, thank
you. Have a good day.